Torchlight licks the pumice throat of Derinkuyu as a hush of wind rises from the vertical shaft, a measured exhale that makes the rock feel warm and alive. Stairways plunge past kitchens, chapels, and stables into a honeycomb, falling 18 levels, where circular stone doors crouch like pupils ready to blink a corridor shut. Some believe this is merely refuge architecture, an emergency city carved by siege and faith. Yet the paradox persists. Why does the stone breathe with clockwork poise? And why do vents, chimneys, and galleries align like organs in a single, engineered body? Others maintain the shafts are practical drafts, harnessing the stack effect, while fringe researchers insist the precision is overbuilt for short-term hiding, as if tuned for a population that expected centuries below. Scholars still debate missing corridors, collapsed connectors, and restricted surveys that end where rumors say long tunnels begin. Elders whisper of passages sealed not by rockfall, but by decision. Is this only a sanctuary, or a lung in a continent-spanning organism? Were these doors meant to stop raiders, or to meter a secret climate? Who designed this? Where do the sealed connectors run? What breath waits beyond the last stone wheel to open and answer? Beneath the feathered serpent pyramid, a gloved hand dips into a black, shimmering pool, and the tunnel flares with cold gleam as mercury ripples like night-turned liquid. Above, pyrite studs glitter like a hammered sky, while mica lies along the walls in frost-pale sheets. Some suggest this is pure ceremony, a river for gods and kings. Yet the paradox bites. Why arrange conductive metal, reflective crystals, and dielectric panes in a buried corridor if no one intended to channel anything? Others claim the materials are symbolic, while fringe theorists propose the tunnel acted as a signal chamber, light piped along the mercury, field stabilized by mica, star patterns flashed from pyrite into a network beneath the city. Historians dispute whether instrument failures in sealed zones were mere glitches or the sign of something still humming silently. Scholars remain divided. The access is irregular, the data incomplete. Was this a theater, or a lab hidden in ritual, clothing? Did a dark river carry offerings or information? Who calibrated a mirror no sunlight could touch? And what message ever moved through that midnight shine? In Malta's honey-colored depths, a whisper unfurls in a low chamber and returns as a velvet thunder. A chest-rattling hum that makes dust. Dance on corbelled ribs while lamplight skims ochre walls and ear-like cells open to a sea of sound. Locals whisper the hypogaum could call across the island. Some scholars contend it is only ritual architecture with eerie acoustics. Engineers argue that 110 Hz resonance, Helmholtz-like cavities, and frequency locking imply deliberate tuning rather than coincidence, while fringe researchers insist this was a communication array, a non-electronic network for trance, coordination, or crowd pacification feeding a deeper complex now sealed. Others maintain the bone deposits and rumors of unusual skulls are overinterpreted, yet inventories conflict, galleries remain restricted, and removed remains have gone quiet in storage. Scholars still debate which voice belonged here, priest, healer, or hidden warden, and whether sound was passage, language, or leash. Was this only an oracle's chamber, or a switchboard of stone, who tuned a room to travel through bodies like weather? What message did they send through bone and blood? And who in the dark below the island was meant to hear it? Heat blooms like an invisible tide as the camera drifts into Naka's crystal cathedral, a vault where breath fogs inside the suit and white selenite spears rise like frozen lightning, angling across a chamber hot enough to fog lenses and blister skin. The light skates along milky beams up to 12 meters long, and each step crunches on gypsum dust that shimmers like frost. Although the air swims near 60 degrees, the paradox comes like a whisper under the visor. A place that threatens life behaves like a nursery, growing perfect crystal colonnades in slow motion, and the geometry feels arranged rather than random, as if the cavern were less a cave than an instrument. Some believe it is only chemistry and patience, hydrothermal fluids saturated with calcium sulfate, a temperature window held for millennia, the slow stacking of molecules into blades. Yet the scale unsettles, and the angles seem to gulp light and return it along the beam like a buried lighthouse. Others argue the forms are no more intentional than icicles, a natural consequence of stability and time. The room, they say, is a fluke we were lucky to see, before pumps stopped and the flood returned. Fringe theorists propose the chamber is a grown biomineral infrastructure, a passive machine for heat buffering and light piping that converts radiant misery into habitable balance, with selenite acting as a waveguide and heat sink in a system tuned to the skin's edge. Local miners still whisper that when drills first broke through, instruments flickered and compasses strayed. Some swear that mapping halted exactly where the beams thickened, and that a second space lies beyond a wall, left deliberately unopened. Scholars remain divided because access is rationed. Shutdowns, limited permits, and halted surveys have turned the site into a rumor mill, and historians dispute whether the most suggestive images were taken at all or are composites assembled. To feed myth, others maintain the cathedral teaches a simpler lesson, that nature can simulate design so convincingly our minds supply intent. And yet the mystery remains when you dim the lamps and see the glow crawl inside the crystal like a ghost of daylight, when you feel the air currents shift as if the room is breathing to protect itself. Fringe researchers insist the cavern demonstrates viable passive climate control for deep habitation, a proof of concept written in gypsum that a civilization could shelter in killing heat by recruiting geology as partner rather than enemy. But geologists counter that any such use would require an impossible stability of temperature and purity no culture could guarantee. Some suggest the beams behave like organ pipes for light, guiding entrance glow along cleavage planes while thermal gradients bleed into the mass, pooling cool behind pillars. Others maintain any piping is poetic, that no one could linger here long enough to use it. Fringe researchers insist initial growth was seeded, biofilms or catalytic impurities laying scaffolds, after which the cavern tended itself. Skeptics reply that samples show nothing beyond patient chemistry. Archivists note gaps in logs, missing files, labels that skip. Administrators answer that flooding and liability forced triage, yet the enigma endures where the map stops at a clean edge. Still the questions linger as the lens fogs and the audio cracks with sweat and static. Who, if anyone, tuned this furnace into a sanctuary? What purpose would a light-carrying forest serve in a city that never sees the sun? And when the pumps go silent and the waters rise, what doors of crystal close behind the flood? And what unseen halls are left to shine where only darkness should survive? Night presses into the galleries of Chavin de Huantar as a conch horn spills a braided note through stone, twisting down blind corridors, dwindling, then returning from an unseen throat with a new color, while footsteps disappear into vents that breathe like flutes. Torchlight skates over carved fangs, feline eyes, and ducts cut so true the air seems to be poured from one room to another. The paradox is not that sound travels, but that it behaves as if shepherded. Echoes arrive on schedule. Water whispers louder in chambers far from the channel, and a corridor's corner amplifies a voice that should have thinned to nothing. Some suggest the complex is ritual theater, a stage where priests sculpted awe, masking entrances and steering pilgrims through sensation. Others claim it is a clever ventilation and drainage scheme, practical genius dressed in sacred iconography. Fringe theorists propose something larger, that Chavin formed a hub in a stone-born network, routing signals through rock via phase delays and hydroacoustic couplings, using conch blasts, water resonance, and infrasonic masking to carry messages. Beneath valleys and above floods, local memory still whispers of guides who could speak in one room and be answered in another, as if a wire connected them. Older guides insist some ducts were blocked after quakes, not because they failed, but because they reached places no one wanted to discuss. Scholars remain divided. Architects model vortices in tight bends and show how pressure zones could draw fresh air miles from the mountain face, while acousticians point out frequency bands that bloom only inside the maze. Historians dispute whether lower levels exist at all, their mention flickering in field notes that end midline when rainy season closes the site. Others maintain the whole effect can be produced with careful staging, flicker, incense, and pulse. Yet the enigma endures when measurements repeat across seasons, tones that anchor at the same nodes, water that voices certain syllables and eats others, murmurs that strengthen precisely at doorways you cannot see. Fringe researchers insist that unmapped floors and culverts, conveniently inaccessible under flood closures, are less danger than design, and that a wider net ran from this mountain to sister shrines by hidden lines of stone. Skeptics counter that no controlled test has ever proved speech intelligibility beyond a few rooms. Field teams once logged a water stare where flow dropped and voice grew stronger, as if liquid stole noise from the air to give it back downstream. The page ends where the storm begins. Some maintain these anomalies vanish with different instruments. Others note the trouble returns with different crews and different gear. A few villagers recall a sealed passage called the Sleeping Throat, reopened, then filled after a roar rolled underfoot like surf, so the camera lingers on a junction where the sound seems to pause as if deciding, and the footprint dust lies untroubled while the air slips around it like a hand. If this was only theater, why do the same frequencies lock to the same stones, year after year? If this was merely plumbing, why do certain corners answer a whisper with a word? And if this was once the spine of a network, where does the last resonance go when it leaves the mountain? And who, if anyone, still knows which? Note calls it home. A light drops down a square throat in the Giza Plateau, and the walls sweat back a dull glow. Ropes creak. Water beads on limestone like cold breath, and the lens finds steps hacked into the shaft, as if carved by someone in a hurry, plunging to a tiered set of chambers where a black pool trembles around a lonely basalt and island. The paradox sharpens with each descent. A supposed funerary complex sits half-drowned and engineered for flow, flood, and lift, fitted with niches and slots that feel more mechanical than ceremonial, as though the dead were an excuse and the design served movement rather than mourning. Some believe the Osiris shaft is precisely that, an elite tomb whose waterlogged state is incidental, a function of a high water table and time. Others argue that the layout resembles a vertical lock, with gates, sills, and pressure cues that would make sense only if cargo or people were being controlled along a hidden run below the plateau. Fringe researchers insist the pool's basalt dais is not an altar, but a station, the point where buoyant platforms could be moored and trimmed before dropping into a subsurface conduit. Skeptics counter that no direct tunnel has been demonstrated, and that dais is just a stone in a flooded room. Old excavation notes mention channels that seem to proceed and voids that ring beyond the wall. Historians dispute the wording and date, while contractors recall ground-penetrating surveys that showed adjacent anomalies later classified or ignored. Local guides sometimes whisper of a draft where no opening shows, a warm exhale on the cheek that flips direction with distant traffic, and divers tell of a silt cloud that returned like a curtain, as if the pool disliked being watched. Scholars still debate the scant diagrams because documentation is patchy. Permissions change, pumps fail, rains arrive, and the most detailed sketches are private or fragmentary. Others maintain there is nothing here but a dramatic cul-de-sac, a monument to the way water and stone conspire to mislead, while engineers point to features that look annoyingly purposeful: beveled lips like floodgates, stepped shoulders where a gate could sit, and marks that align with a level that repeats from chamber to chamber. Fringe theorists propose the shaft behaved as a buoyant lift system, swapping heavy labor for controlled flotation. Opponents answer that such a system would require maintenance, valves, and venting no one has found. Yet the enigma endures when adjacent voids are detected and then sealed by policy rather than stone, when excavation closes with the phrase, "for safety," and when records stop exactly where the measurements become most interesting. Some claim the funerary model fits, if one assumes symbolic rivers and star maps. Others maintain the practical details keep intruding like a cough. Channels that encourage head pressure, ledges that invite gates, geometry that treats the flood not as enemy but as harness. Archivists list skipped pump serials and missing frames. Administrators answer that schedules slipped, crews rotated, and storms reshuffled priorities beyond tidy reports for months during closures. Standing at the edge of the pool, watching ripples tap the basalt, the camera holds its breath, and the shaft seems to hold it back. If this is only a tomb, why carve like a lock and stage the water? If this is merely geology in a hole, why do the walls wear chamfers tuned for flow? And if this was an entry, where did the black conduit go when the last platform slipped under? And who, if anyone, still knows which door out on the plateau opens to receive it? The torch sighs and gutters out at the mouth of the Chincana, and for an instant the stone ahead becomes a breathing absence. No wall, only a cool draft threading from darkness through the teeth of Sacsayhuaman's terraces, while the city lights of Cusco tremble far below. Fingers read the bevels of polygonal blocks that lock like vertebrae, knuckles skimming a pressure-fit seam until a shoulder finds a hidden lintel, and a slit yields to a swallowing stare. Somewhere under Coricancha, elders say, the passages knot, and each landing exhales like a valve in a living machine. The paradox arrives in the hush between footfalls. A maze famous as ritual theater behaves like infrastructure, with doors that are not doors, shafts that choose the wind's direction, and junctions that seem to test a traveler as if the mountain had opinions about who should pass. Some believe these are devotional corridors, pilgrim routes designed to compress prayer into breath and heartbeat, while stone lessons in balance and trust unfold in the dark. Others maintain the Chincana is a safety warren, a set of refugees, and bypasses for siege or storm, all symbol and survival, nothing more. Fringe theorists propose a bolder map, gated corridors aligned to deeper hubs that stitch temples, springs, and sight lines into a single underway, with airflow cues used as wayfinding and polygonal locks, functioning not as ornament, but as coded thresholds. Local guides still whisper that a draft will turn right before a choice does, and that, if you listen, the mountain itself tells you when you are walking with it or against it. Scholars remain divided. Some swear collapses prove the paths were incidental, while engineers counter that failures happen at man-made chokes, precisely where hidden lintels suggest deliberate gating. Historians dispute the accident reports. One closure at noon, one at dusk, one after a shout and a rush of cold, and archivists note how surveys end abruptly at the same mislabeled, legendary cavity. Others argue that air is a fickle guide, that seasons toy with drafts, that no empire would trust a whisper to steer armies or priests, and yet the stones remember pressures in their joints, and the steps wear smooth where light never lived. Fringe researchers insist the Andean intersite network was once active, that corridors under Sacsayhuaman and Coricancha fed into long carriers now sealed beneath plazas and gardens, and that the locks worked with wedges and counterweights to meter passage like a heartbeat. Some suggest earthquakes merely broke what time had already loosened. Others claim deliberate burials swallowed mouths that ran too far, too deep, toward hubs no longer sanctioned by the surface. Scholars still debate the old field sketch, showing a turning with 3 lintels, one above another like the stacked lids of a box. Skeptics call it flourish, while masons say the geometry reads like control, a way to tune the mountain's breath. And when closures follow accidents in cadence, 2 in a month, then none for years, curators shrug and stamp the legend again, while night hikers report a sound like cloth being pulled through a ring. If this were only ceremony, why do the breezes spin at thresholds as if counting you in? If this were only safety, why build locks that cannot be seen? And if gates once opened toward deeper hubs, where does the last draft go when the corridor ends? Who signed the order to drown the way with rubble? And what temple carved by subtraction waits beneath the streets with lungs of its own, still breathing somewhere below the plazas, still measuring patience and intent, still calling careful, feet to descend? At first light, the cliff at Ellora reddens like warm iron, and the Kailasa temple appears not as something built, but as a canyon conjured from a single block. Courtyards peel downward in terraces, while scaffolds of shadow cling to pillars that never knew assembly. Rainwater threads the channels cut along the plinths, slipping into drains that vanish under thresholds. In the pits around the monolith, subcells brood in half-dark like staging bays, and the floor bears tool marks that run toward the depth no staircase announces. The paradox sits in the geometry. A monument carved by subtraction has the footprint of a lid, and the distribution of effort suggests not an object made to be seen from afar, but a cap calibrated to manage what lies below. Some suggest the grandeur is purpose enough. Devotion petrified, an emperor's vow realized by chisels that sang until the hill became a hymn. Others claim the drainage alone explains the trenches and culverts, a wise response to monsoon rage. Everything else, they say, is piety and labor sculpting spectacle. Fringe researchers insist the excavation pits, the missing volumes, and the tidy logistics of spoil belie a deeper intent. That stone was not merely removed, but routed, and that underground galleries functioned as workshops and corridors feeding a broader system no survey has published. Local workers still whisper about a culvert that blew warm mist on a winter morning and was quietly bricked, and about a notch in shadow where a lantern guttered as if the air preferred a different direction. Scholars remain divided. Quarry math does not balance. Spoil heaps do not match the temple's negative mass. And yet official mappings taper at the tourist boundary, as if the hill's depths were none of scholarship's business. Historians dispute whether lost spoil traveled by road to vanished projects, while engineers point to ramps that end at drops, and to cuts that look sized for sledges disappearing under lintels too low for ritual. Others maintain the below-grade works are only drains and cellars, practical adjuncts mistaken for mystery, and yet the cuts repeat in ratios more like planning than happenstance, and the staging bays read like loading docks without wagons. Fringe theorists propose Kailasa served as a monumental valve, a carved cap locking over removed volumes now collapsed or sealed, its water management not solely for rain, but for pressure, providing a stable crown for a voided platform. Some believe a hidden haulage system once moved stone inward rather than outward, floor grooves lubricated by water to float burdens into galleries. Skeptics answer that no pulley scars or axle seats have been proved. Scholars still debate a line of shallow sockets that trace the lip of a trench, decoration to some, anchor points to others. And when a survey halts with a polite notice citing conservation, archivists note. The data lines with a private report about an unexpected cavity. Others note faint tremors felt at noon when no quarrying occurs, a pulse in the floor like a held breath. Where the guidebooks end, cart ruts, scored in basalt, run away toward the horizon, and then simply stop at the sea. If Kailasa is only a masterpiece of worship, why does its plan behave like a lid sized for a throat? If drainage is the whole story, why do culverts end in rooms that are not rooms? And if the missing stone truly left the hill, where were the lifetimes of rubble hidden? Where do the grooves intend a burden to glide? And what chambers under the monolith accept a cargo that never sees the sun? On Malta's limestone skin, dawn strikes the plateau, and the rock returns it in pale gold. But what holds the eye are the twin grooves that run together across fields, like rails, etched by a vanished weight, crossing, splaying, deepening, and then diving off the promontories into foaming blue, as if a convoy had calmly driven into the sea. Inland, the lines pass by roofless cisterns and stone mouths that drop to shadows cool as cellars. A breath rises from the hypogeum's precinct, and the ground seems translated into a diagram whose legend no one kept. The paradox is not that tools left marks, but that the marks behave like infrastructure, parallel, repeatable, graded by use, and aligned to points where nothing stands today. A topography that suggests flow rather than aimless wandering. Some believe the grooves are the simple scars of sledges or carts dragged along soft rock in a wetter age, farm work frozen by time. Others claim they are quarry traffic lanes for stone blocks, routine logistics without romance. Fringe researchers insist the spacing, branching, and sudden terminations look less like roads than like alignment rails, load guides intended to accept heavy runners that were water-lubricated in channels, easing burdens toward subsurface openings that were later sealed. Local families still whisper about odd hollows that hummed after storms, and about fields where plows struck flat lids that sounded like drums. In some hamlets, elders recall a cave walled overnight after a child vanished. Scholars remain divided. Disconnected mapping has left patchwork surveys that end at property lines, and the most suggestive sections lie under private land where gates do not open. Historians dispute the chronology, arguing whether grooves deepened across centuries or were cut during a short intense phase. Engineers counter that differential wear implies repeated, guided loading rather than random traffic. Others maintain the ties to the hypogeum are poetic projection, temple gravity pulling every anomaly into its story. And yet the ruts gather near sinkholes and old cisterns, as though the island once moved under its own instructions. Fringe theorists propose the network fed a buried system. Rails capture runners. Water poured from cisterns turned friction to glide, and the loads disappeared into mouths that served workshops and underways linking settlements along the ridge. Some suggest the groove's dive into cliffs marks the bite of former causeways now eroded, or the end of ramps dismantled when sea lanes changed. Others argue that the sea edge tracks make no sense unless the target lay below the tide line. Scholars still debate a cluster near the coast where 4 parallel cuts merge into 2, then 1, the depth increasing as if the load gained mass. Skeptics say that is only a change of slope. Archivists list sealed cavities with mismatched permits. Surveyors reply that safety trumps curiosity when ceilings sound hollow. Where the diagrams fray, the island takes the lines and loses them, and the camera walks until the grooves fade into scrub and return again. Stubborn as veins. A diver once traced a line below the cliff face and surfaced speechless, pointing at a shelf cut as clean as a wharf, a terrace in blue shadow. If these are only the casualties of old agriculture, why do the rails converge as though aiming at absent mouths? If this is merely quarry logistics, why do channels follow the tracks as if feeding them with water? And if a buried network once received everything that rolled, where does the vanished cargo sleep now? What gates were closed that no map admits? And what unfinished journey still points straight into the waves? Pine fog braids through the cedars on Mount Shasta as dawn thins to pearl, and a low mouth of rock exudes breath like a sleeping beast, warm vapor rolling across pumice while the needles hush and the snowpack smokes. Inside, the darkness is velvet and oddly dry, and when the wind shifts the opening sighs, a cave lip pulsing as if the mountain itself were regulating lungs no one has seen. The paradox arrives at the threshold. In a landscape of frost and alpine silence, these lava tubes irradiate gentle heat, drafts reverse without storms, and prints fade where pumice should hold them, as though corridors redirect pressure with invisible doors. Some believe the tales of Lemurians are only mythic runoff, esoteric pulp grafted onto geology, while others argue that persistent reports of lights moving under ash nights, of music with no source, and of footprints that end at rock suggest occupation, not fantasy. Fringe theorists propose an isolated refugium still active below, a community nested in tube networks and thermal vents, harvesting warmth, moisture, and concealment from the same engine that built the cone. Old loggers whisper about a gallery that breathed cinnamon in winter and sulfur in spring. Climbers recall a blue lamp slipping across talus as if submerged under stone. Rangers note entrances barred for safety after disappearances that were later retyped as storms and missteps. Scholars remain divided. Volcanologists describe textbook tubes, skylights, and pit craters, Biologists counter with troglodytic insects and mosses out of place at that elevation. Historians dispute the timing of the earliest sightings against the arrival of theosophists who branded the mountain with luminous masters. Others maintain the safety closures are routine, that unstable ceilings and carbon dioxide pockets make caution mandatory, and that every vanish is explained by exposure or hubris. Yet some suggest the closures follow a rhythm. Early autumn, late spring, when meltwater and geothermal pulses might open inland doors that summer, and deep winter keep shut. Fringe researchers insist the mountain's tube geometry forms a naturally encrypted city. Braided conduits, choke points cooled by condensate, rooms perched above heavier gases, thermal gradients that cook away scent, and aeolian noise that mimics wind so that habitation hides inside ordinary weather. Local Yana stories speak of people who walked in the warm dark to evade the teeth of snow, and elders in weeded cabins say you can hear a kettle hum under granite before the first storm of November. A few prospectors still carry a lantern, even at noon. Debate sharpens where maps blur, surveys jump ravines, LiDAR returns flicker, and the most traversable tubes kink behind welded gates. Some claim private parcels changed hands to shell entities after hikers posted flicker film of a door that opened where no seam had been. Others claim hoax and pareidolia, arguing that hexed mountains breed vision. Geochemists point to fumarole, chemistry capable of sharpening smell and light hallucinations. Search teams remind the press how quickly ash fog erases a trail, and yet the mystery remains when a vent exhales warm rain on a night below freezing, when microphones pick a hum below wind frequencies, when a rescuer's thermal camera shows a slow blush crawling along stone as if a hearth were banked on the far side of a wall. If community can learn to vanish inside a popular peak by partnering with geology, letting tubes, gradients, and noise do the hiding, what else could thrive here without announcement? If disappearances are only weather, why do some gates wear new bolts after unreported drills? And if the colony is only a story, who tends the cairn with fresh bread and salt, tucked beneath basalt every solstice? And who, exactly, is it meant to feed? Ink-black butter lamps gutter as monks trace stairways, spiraling into the navel of a painted mandala. Each tier, a ring road of worlds descending through blues and vermilions toward a point that feels less like ink than a door. Paper smells of juniper smoke, and outside the windows snow halos the passes that guard a monastery older than its walls. The paradox appears on the parchment. Poetry that acts like cartography, epics that describe Patala and Shambhala not as clouds of doctrine, but as layered geographies with bearings, altitudes, and gates aligned to mountains, caves, vents, and faults that surveyors still plot. Some suggest these are teaching images only, cosmic mnemonics to guide meditation, while others argue that the nested diagrams read like route charts, layered coordinates meant to be walked as much as contemplated. Fringe theorists propose the maps are security devices, a cipher disguised as devotion in which gods cloak gradients, bodhisattvas conceal waypoints, and demons stand in for hazards like gas, flood, or collapse. Pilgrims whisper about staircases cut into shale that go warm by noon and cold at midnight. Herders tell of valleys where prayer flags snap with no wind, and gullies drone like bees under snow. Novices report that certain caves are opened only after a vow and a fever. Scholars remain divided. Sanskritists count metaphor while geologists recognize fault geometry, and historians dispute whether references to southern mouths and northern highways describe ritual compasses or literal corridors. Others maintain the injunction, "Only initiates descend," reflects safety, not secrecy. Monasteries are careful because mountains kill. Chants focus the mind so feet do not wander. Yet some claim keepers guard particular dolines and springs with unusual attention, and that way-leaving punishments fall not for blasphemy, but for disobedience to an old evacuation plan. Fringe researchers insist the axial stairways and 8-petal lotuses point to hub sites where stable rock and geothermal comfort intersect. The mantra wheels, they say, double as azimuth tools to measure drift in magnetic anomalies that wander year to year. Old bone chants carry instructions for walking the thunder's breath along cliff bands where caves exhale at dusk. The set of Tibetan folios overlays deity palaces with known skylines, peaking each wrathful crown with a known mountain. Debate sharpens around access. Archives hold scrolls wrapped in silk that local abbots decline to unwrap for outsiders, citing vows. Some philologists mutter that fabulists filled gaps, while hermits inside valleys recite coordinates after naming the weather for 3 days running. Others claim that every underworld is inside the mind, that Shambhala is a compass of compassion. Cartographers counter that when you chart the mandala sectors across the range, recurrent features line up. Sulfur vents at wrath gates, sinkholes underwater districts, blind valleys where drums echo for hours without a player. And yet the mystery remains when an expedition following verses reaches a pass at dawn and finds a lintel of quartz where no trail marks it. When a cave mouth that tasted of iron in autumn tastes of cinnamon in spring, when a prayer read counterclockwise yields a path that avoids a cornice by the width of a palm. If these diagrams are only teaching art, why do their angles land on faults and skylights with a surveyor's satisfaction? If guardians merely fear accidents, why do they maintain keys for doors without monasteries? And if a knowledge tradition has preserved access protocols for centuries, what long relationship whispers from the far side of those vows who started the practice of reading weather as password, and what exactly waits at the end of a pilgrimage that descends instead of climbs? At the bottom of the world, a drill head hums over miles of ice, while vapor frost halos headlamps, and the aurora writhes in silence beyond the weather tents. Needles tick as sensors warm, and a blue-white plain stretches featureless to every horizon, hiding a lake larger than some countries beneath a ceiling older than cities. The paradox sharpens with each telemetry chirp. In a place meant to be sterile, the instruments taste heat, plumes, odd chemistries, and pressure signatures that speak of currents and domes, as if some warm black sea breathes under the white. Roofed, rivers winding in darkness where wind has never walked. Some suggest Lake Vostok is simply an isolated ecosystem sealed since ice first closed the lid, a cathedral aquarium of microbes tracing patient circles in chemical light, while others argue the geometry reads like harbor, basins coupled to sills, cul-de-sacs shaped like docking bays, channels that rise toward thresholds under grounded ice. Fringe theorists propose a covered port maintained by geothermally powered infrastructure. Freshwater lenses managed like lungs under the cap, thermal chimneys cleared to keep conduits open, and low-frequency pings perhaps designed to police icequakes and navigation. Pilots whisper about flight bands that kink around certain coordinates. Logisticians mutter that data embargoes arrive in tidy sequences after aerogeophysics runs. Satellite operators note gaps in passes where coverage should overlap. Scholars remain divided. Glaciologists map katabatic winds and basal friction to explain heat patches, while microbiologists publish fragments about amino acids and cells that look alive, but refuse to culture. Historians dispute whether the first rumors of roofed rivers preceded or followed specific radar campaigns. Others maintain secrecy is procedural, preventing contamination, protecting meltwater purity, controlling international protocols. Yet some field techs say certain returns were classified before sample integrity could be verified. Fringe. Researchers insist the lake's pressure domes trace a grid, and that repeat echoes along the eastern margin look like walls refracting sound. Skeptics counter that crystalline ice does weird things to radar, and that any grid is an artifact of processing. The debate tightens where the data thins. A borehole pauses inches short of breakthrough. A season ends early because weather changed, and a promised tranche of magnetics releases with a blank where a plume was hinted in committee. A veteran pilot tells of a dead reckoning leg where the compass drifted while GPS blinked blind. A hydrophone tech logged a slow beat for 9 minutes that ceased when the generator was unplugged. An international traverse massed fuel for a push, and then turned back with engines healthy. The report citing surface instability as cooks served for a week that never came. With no storm forecast, others argue the warm chemistry belongs to bedrock and mantle alone. Geophysicists point to serpentinization and radiogenic heat. Oceanographers reply that the signal rises and falls in tides that should not exist under a lid. And yet the mystery remains each time seismic whispers ripple from below with the rhythm of something circulatory. Each time a tethered camera fogs. Before the lens even cools, each time the ice sings a chord, no instrument predicts, as if a hull, not a glacier, flexed. If this is merely an untouched aquarium, why the awkward fences in airspace and the elegant shape of basins beneath? If this is only geology, why do channels climb towards sills like roads to doors? And if a sealed aquatic corridor runs under the cap, who uses it? What law governs a harbor no sky has seen? And what turns the explorers back? One flight early, with fuel still quietly in the drums and no storm on the instruments, ice fog scours the carrier decks like shredded gauze, while cranes freeze mid-swing, turbines whining in the polar hush. On the bridge, a clipped order cuts through static. Stand down, reverse course, go home, and the white horizon swallows. The intention of a season. The paradox bites. Why would a massive post-war task force, ships, ski-equipped bombers, tracked convoys, field labs, retreat early from a continent with no enemy? Some believe weather hammered the mission into caution. Others argue the timetable never fit the storms they blamed. Fringe theorists propose the fleet met the unexpected. Subglacial relief that rose like walls, magnetic drift that spun compasses, warm pockets steaming from the ice like lungs. Historians dispute the logs. Reels go missing, dates conflict, transcripts arrive redacted to bone. Scholars remain divided as pilots whisper of instruments that lied and camera shutters that failed at the same coordinates, and yet the mystery remains. If nothing waited there, why do maps kink around certain bays? Why do reports stutter exactly where radar brightens? And why did a force built to endure turn back on a clear morning? What did they see? What did they hear? And what told steel and nerve to leave before the ice answered? Night on the mesa holds its breath until the earth exhales a tone you feel in the ribs before the ear admits it. A low-banded thrum that slicks across adobe walls and juniper shadows. Dogs tilt to nothing. Wind chimes hang still, and the desert hums like a buried cello. The paradox is its persistence, a sound without a source that drifts in place, local, yet unlocatable. Some suggest factory fans, distant highways, or hidden substations. Others claim geological friction, microquakes, fluid in faults, the crust itself singing. Fringe researchers insist the hum rides infrasonic carriers through strata, guided by old lava flows and buried arroyos that act as acoustic waveguides for something deeper. An energy grid, slow machines or pressure systems we haven't named. Scholars still debate the surveys. Sensors spike, then flatten, and data gaps yawn where the note grows strongest. Locals whisper of nights when metal cups tremble and the stove door ticks without heat. And yet the enigma endures. Officials shrug, subjective. But the base returns with weather that never comes and storms that never break. If it isn't industry, what sparks the heartbeat? If it isn't nerves, what stirs the dust? And if it is a system, who built the instrument? Where does the signal go and what decides when the desert sings? Torchlight rakes a tough corridor until a circular plug rolls from its notch and seals the passage with a single granite syllable, air sighing as if a lung just held its breath. Beyond the stone, galleries dogleg, arrow slits wait, and floor slots promise traps you cannot see. The paradox isn't ingenuity, but intent. Doors weighing tons pivot to close from inside, keyholes hide in shadow, and kill lanes funnel intruders into smoke and gas. Some believe these were refugees from raiders. Defense, made domestic, the architecture of survival. Others maintain the design reads like biosecurity. One-way pivots, counter-slope galleries, vents placed to trap fumes and starve flame, corridors groomed to quarantine a threat that breathes. Fringe theorists propose deeper cities demanded surface, buffers, stone lungs that could inhale danger and exhale only silence. Historians dispute the primary use. Guides repeat the war refuge tale, while engineers point to pressure cues and air behavior that make ritual explanations feel thin. Scholars remain divided, but the mechanisms don't. Plugs that only turn once, alleys that borrow wind, chambers that sip air like measured medicine. If these weren't quarantines, why the gas traps? If no hidden populations waited below, why the one-way seals? And if the cities trained for invasion, who or what did they expect to keep out? To contain, or to never let return? A wash of invisible pulses combs the tunnel as lidar paints the stone, and there, a second glimmer blooms behind a featureless wall beneath Teotihuacan, as if a hidden mirror just blinked. Dust motes sparkle like crushed obsidian. Mica lies. In crisp leaves along the floor, and sealed pits sit quiet as unplugged sockets. The paradox cuts clean. Were these glittering layers and shut chambers merely stagecraft? Why do they mimic shielding, light handling, and controlled airflow in a place that shouldn't need them? Some believe it's ritual cache, theatric darkness, dressed with star metal. Others claim it's artisanship, mica for status, obsidian for awe. Fringe researchers insist the array looks operational. Yamai dampers in mica, reflective ducts, steering glints, negative pressure corridors that pull breath one way. Scholars remain divided. Finds were trumpeted, then follow-ups slipped into limbo, and field reels blink out right where the second shine begins. Local whispers say instruments misbehaved and compasses sulked. If this is pageantry, why the engineering? If this is only debris, why the sealed sumps arranged like panels around a service bay? And if nodes keep appearing under separate pyramids, how many stations sleep in the avenue's shadow? What did they once coordinate, and who decided the next door stays shut? At Chaco, the noon sun lays a white blade across sandstone, and the short great houses stare in rank, their walls sighting horizons like instruments. Wind grazes kivas until they murmur, and pale roads run laser straight over emptiness before plunging into sage and silence. The paradox rides those roads. Pilgrim ways that lead nowhere intersect subterranean voids and sound-hungry canyons that carry a whisper farther than a shout. Some suggest processions and ceremonial ties, direction as devotion. Others argue logistics, timber and corn moved by empire. Fringe theorists propose a deeper brief. Rammed earth resonators, beacon kivas, and night path acoustics that coupled surface signals to subsurface entries, a relay between stars, mesas, and ground. Scholars still debate core samples and resistivity, hints. The ceremonial label arrives early and stalls shovels where roadbeds meet droning gullies. Rangers recount nights when a drum on Fajada echoes from a ravine. Mouth no map marks. Elders whisper that certain doors open only when thunder walks. If this was only pageant, why tune walls to equinox and roads to stone mouths? If supplies were the goal, why carve ramps toward cavities? And if messages rode the desert skin into the earth, where did they descend? Who answered from below? And what listening chamber still waits inside the mile of quiet between house and horizon, high in an Andean cut where wind forgets to move? Moonlight fractures on walls of volcanic glass, every breath halved by narrow slots that drink the dark and return a thin, cold gleam. Obsidian flows stand like frozen smoke, faces polished slick as water, corridors narrowing to shoulder-width knives. The paradox shivers in the optics, call it a quarry, yet the surfaces read like lenses. Glare dies where a step must land, and sight lines bend to hide your shadow while showing you the next mark. Some suggest extraction, the glass mind, the sheen incidental. Others claim geomancy, sacred stone kept pristine by chance. Fringe researchers insist this is stealth, built by subtraction, low light channeling, periscopic angles, and glare masking. Planes guiding feet toward underways that daylight denies. Scholars remain divided. Permits stamp it, geologic curiosity. Mapping requests expire, and a single sketch of a mirrored loop vanishes into a filing cabinet no one opens. By candlelight, the vellum breathes like skin, and a quill's shadow crawls across a coastline no sailor should have known. Headlands shaped like unfrozen Antarctica, bays drawn where ice now rules, contours hinted as if the cartographer had walked ashore that wouldn't be discovered for centuries. The paradox gnaws gently. How do 16th century charts sketch pre-glacial forms and polar geometries with a surveyor's calm? Some believe it's luck and echo, medieval map mash with generous eyes. Others argue ancient sources fed the compilers, copies of a lost master, while the master itself remains forever unshown. Fringe theorists propose subglacial mapping, by resonance, shipborne drums reading echoes off the cap, or oral transfers from travelers of a sea below who knew the under-ice relief like coastal folk know tides. Scholars remain divided. Historians dispute dates, geodesists mutter about projections, and archivists note marginalia that promise a source and then go coy. And yet the mystery remains. If it's embroidery, why do capes and sounds align with buried topography? If it's memory, whose memory lasts past ice ages? And if it's borrowed knowledge, who lent it? From which harbor without sky? And what other margins were edited to hide the path to that uncharted shore? A locked platform gleams under old enamel signs, a breath of diesel without a timetable, and down the tunnel a train nose hums that no schedule admits. Deeper still, concrete gives to tiled corridors, then brick, then poured rooms with phones that never ring. The paradox prickles. Is this only Cold War redundancy? Or does Metro 2 brush older hollow ways the city forgot to remember? Some suggest emergency spines, command posts, evac routes, dormitory grids. Others claim contractors followed easier rock, TBMs drifting to ancient voids because the ground itself whispered path of least resistance. Fringe researchers insist bricked portals line up with czarist cellars and deeper acoustics, an interface stitched across regimes. Officials deny, veterans shrug, and scholars remain divided, while workers lore names stations whose names are numbers. Historians dispute maps that surface and vanish. Surveyors show drift alignments that make denial feel rehearsed. Yet the Yabur enigma endures. If it's purely modern, why the masonry grammar beneath the rebar? If there's nothing older, why do emergency doors open onto air that smells of earth, not paint? And if shadow lines ride under the Capitol, where do they meet? Who rides them in the quiet hours? And what city runs parallel to the one we know? A blue cross breathes in salt-white dark, its halo crawling along columns carved from the mine itself, while the floor booms softly underfoot like a drum stretched with ocean memory. Galleries yaw open to the size of stadiums, cool air kissing the cheeks with brine. The paradox gleams. Is Zipaquira a cathedral born of devotion, or a retrofit face for a deeper civic machine? Pressure chambers and vents, masking a system that once fed, cooled, and sheltered. Some suggest pure piety. Miners carving sanctuary where danger lived. Others maintain brine cooling, vault stability, and low EM pockets speak a second language, engineering first, liturgy draped after. Fringe researchers insist abandoned feeders disappear behind tourist facades, their gates mortared for safety, exactly where the breeze shifts temperature. Scholars still debate load maps, airflow plots, and the mystery of rooms that drink sound. Guides whisper that radios falter on certain thresholds. Electricians swear the hum dies as if swallowed. Still the questions linger. If it's only worship, why do vents behave like lungs with a duty cycle? If the feeders are history, why do some doors exhale colder than the nave? And if a sacred front can cloak a civic core, what congregation was it truly built to protect? Sea wind combs the Nuraga crowns while swallows wheel above basalt, and from a cracked lintel a colder draught spills up from the island's bones. Courtyards step into shadow wells, and beyond the threshold the floor squares out into unnaturally regular voids, edges too true for accident. The paradox settles low. Fortress towers claim the sky, yet the stone seems preoccupied with downstairs, hypogea latticed like plans, chokes and bends that read like traffic control. Some believe it's storage and rite, Bronze Age rooms repurposed by weather and time. Others claim a sealed transit laces Sardinia, basalt conduits tuned to purge with seawater pulse, neuralgic nodes masking a buried spine. Fringe theorists propose a Mediterranean hub, choke points for metering bodies and goods between inland highlands and coastal mouths, now corked and filed under Bronze Age. Scholars remain divided. Finds get shunted to labels that end questions, and excavations pause where drafts turn metallic. And yet the enigma endures. If these are only cellars, why the precision of bends and vents? If no line runs beneath, why does the island breathe in patterns of tide? And if a corridor once threaded this coast to coast, where are its living gates? Who shut them, and what traffic was never meant to see daylight again. A stone corridor in Knossos bends like a thought. Light falls away, and the air cools with a faint mineral sweetness as water whispers from somewhere lower than the plane allows. Lantern rays glance off plastered walls, past terracotta drainheads, toward stairwells that keep descending even when the tourist map stops. The paradox tightens. A palace, famed for labyrinthine myth, appears engineered less for courts than for flow. Flood tunnels, cistern ladders, sally ports, and baffled thresholds that breathe like valves. Some believe this is ritual drama dressed as plumbing, the Minoans mastering water to stage a cosmology. Others claim it's practical brilliance alone. Storm control, sanitation, storage. Fringe theorists propose another reading, Knossos, as a surface lid for a deeper lattice, a wayfinding school that points down, not across, with drains doubling as masked entries and culverts as covert corridors. Scholars still debate Evans's restorations. Historians dispute reinforced floors that entombed voids. Conservators whisper of no time for sub-survey stamped on old requests. Yet the enigma endures where draft turns at blind corners and steps vanish under patched pavements. If this was only palace, why the warlike sally ports underground? If ceremony, why hide ladders to black water? And if there is a lattice below, where does its first rung begin? Who sealed the lesson into stucco? And what waits beneath the myth of a king and his maze? In a Javan river cave, black as ink, a hairline, seam of blue threads along the ceiling, and widens into constellations, glow points clustered in niches, each pulsing like a patient tide, while the air keeps a steady, body-kind temperature, and the water moves without a ripple's voice. The paradox hums. Nature's lanterns bloom in patterns that mimic root marks, brightening at bends and thinning at falls, as if someone tuned a map into living light. Some suggest mere biology, fungus gnats, bacteria, and mineral films thriving where moisture lingers. Others argue the clustering, spacing, and endurance exceed chance. Fringe researchers insist the glow is cultivated, nutrient seeding on waypoints, moisture managed by drips coaxed from overhead, airflow patterned by hidden baffles so that colonies thrive precisely where feet must choose. Scholars remain divided. Biologists defend protection orders that halt deeper entry, while cavers whisper that the brightest seams sit over ledges that sound hollow. Rangers say, preserve the biota, but logs show closures shifting with seasons rather than crowds. Still the questions linger where the seam meets a dark throat and refuses to proceed without you. If this is only wild light, why does it sketch decisions? If someone tended it, who taught the cave to glow like a guide? And if the route continues, what city needs stars underground? What hands keep them fed? And what happens when the lamps all dim at once? A jade river slides under Guilin's limestone teeth and sighs into chambers the size of cathedrals, where wind shafts murmur like organ pipes and underground lakes lie black as lacquer, their shores furred with calcite curtains. The hills breathe like lungs exhaling cool drafts that turn corners with obedient grace. The paradox rises with the mist. Are these tourist spectacles or arteries of an older transit web, already numbered by nature? Stack winds, thermal siphons, lake locks, awaiting only modest edits to become highways below the world. Some believe they are simply karst, performing its slow choreography. Others claim the regularity of shafts and the pairing of domes and sumps look suspiciously convenient. Fringe theorists propose that ancient travelers learned to ride the pressure, reading wind for direction and using lake levels as gates, while beacon fires or drums stitched surface cliffs to subsurface halls. Scholars remain divided. Hydrologists model perfect siphons that would move air and people, while officials stamp certain caverns closed for safety, especially the military caves that vanish from brochures. And yet the mystery remains where a path ends at a locked iron grate, and the draft behind it smells of rain without weather. If these are only wonders, why do they act like infrastructure? If they were corridors, who tuned the breathing hills? And if the arteries still connect, what tide moves under the range? What cargo rides the dark? And who decides when the valves open? A spiral stair vanishes into cool blue tufa at Orvieto, torches stippling the damp as twin corkscrews dive past arched slits where daylight arrives in measured coins. The wall is pocked like honeycomb with dovecote niches, and below, cistern. Chambers hold a dark sheen while the breath of the hill rises in steady, cellar-sweet drafts. The paradox lives in the elegance, a well that performs like a transit hub, a double helix engineered to keep bodies from colliding by routing descent and ascent along separate spirals, light arriving at predictable intervals as if a clock had been carved into stone, and landings widened like platforms that expect cues. Some believe this is merely medieval utility, city water secured during siege, mules turning with panniers while masons timed their steps to sun through the slit. Others maintain the 100 wells of the plateau were nothing more than redundancy, civic prudence layered in stone. Fringe researchers insist the design reads as modular descent, scaled for crowds, bidirectional traffic flow to meter people, light shaft timing to pulse movement, sump cooling to scrub heat from breath, so a multitude could live far below the piazza without choking. Locals still whisper that the air tastes different at certain hours, as though shutters somewhere underfoot open and close on a schedule no one admits, and that the pigeons once kept in the dovecotes were less food than sensors for bad air. Scholars remain divided. Engineers point to the gradient, the anti-slip treads, the turn radii that fit pack animals yet feel human comfortable, while archivists find requests for deeper scans filed and frozen with the stamp medieval utility, no further study. Historians dispute whether late restorations entombed sub-levels beneath new brick, and guides tell of side doors mortared after an accident that never reached the papers. Others argue that romance invents a city beneath a city, that the glamour of a helix seduces us into imagining commuters instead of carriers. Yet some suggest the rhythm of the light betrays intention, the slits staggered so that glare never blinds a turn, the cooling sumps positioned where the pulse quickens, the curve's pitch keeping the inner wall close enough for a scared hand. Fringe theorists propose the stair was one module among many, a standard unit that could stack into an urban depth. Water on top, people below, stores and clinics farther down, where the temperature steadies and noise cannot betray a crowd. Others claim the dovecote walls prove a layered economy, birds feeding coal-scant kitchens while marking airflow shifts. Skeptics counter that a dovecote is just a dovecote. Still, the numbers argue appetite. 248 steps per spiral, landings like lay-bys, a width generous enough for opposing traffic, yet narrow enough to discourage loitering. Scholars debate whether the builders copied an older pattern, Etruscan precedent, Roman hypogeum, or a manual now lost to silt and salt, while municipal notices decline ground-penetrating radar on heritage grounds. And yet the mystery remains in the way the stone teaches the body what to do. You fall into cadence with cut and light, as if obeying signals. You breathe easier where the sumps glimmer. You hear an answering drip below that sounds like a crowd turned quiet. If this was only a bucket's throat, why the choreography of movement? If the label utility suffices, why the refusal to map beyond the waterline? And if Orvieto perfected traffic engineering for depth, where does the helix lead when it leaves the guide path? Who timed the light to the step like a metronome? And what other stairwells wait under neighboring palazzi to receive a city that descends instead of scatters? At Delphi, afternoon light slants across bleached marble, and laurel leaves tremble over a cleft, where heat breathes like a sleeping spring. From the Adyton, a pale vapor lifts, and a whisper, dropped in the nave, seems to grow bones as it climbs. The vaulted stone, a quiet syllable swelling until it feels like an order placed in the mouth. The paradox hides in the architecture that pretends to be prayer, a sanctuary balanced on an active fault, chambers tuned to certain notes, and gases that bend minds and voices in tandem, as though the place were less temple than interface. Some believe the oracle is nothing but liturgy gilded by geology, priestesses intoxicated by ethylene, attendants staging a ritual of ambiguity around the ache of a valley. Others argue for a more precise technology, resonant vaults that amplify specific frequencies, speaking tubes or reflecting jars, and a ritual schedule synced to micro-vents that open and close with seismic tides. Fringe theorists propose that Delphi functioned as a control room for a wider under-network, a point where sound and chemistry entrained messengers to descend, breath-patterned, cognition softened, then return with news from nodes below. Local lore still whispers that the earth here listens as much as it speaks, that a shout hurled toward Parnassus will curve and come back as counsel, and that some caves accept a voice in one language and answer in another. Scholars remain divided. Geologists map intersecting faults and hydrocarbon seeps, while classicists dismiss mechanical readings as anachronism, and acousticians demonstrate that a chant at one pitch blooms into the Adyton like a living thing. Historians dispute whether plumbing found near the sanctuary watered pilgrims or fed a fog machine. Restorers note cut stones that read like baffles. Priests maintain that mystery, not mechanism, moved the world. Others claim psychoactive vapors alone suffice. No need for pipes, only intention and belief. Yet field notes describe syllables that ricochet between columns with metronomic ease. Fringe researchers insist the ritual was a protocol. Incense masking sulfur, rhythms latching heartbeats. The Pythia's utterance coded for couriers who knew which caves to enter after the session, which phrasing opened which door. Some suggest the laurel crown was also a censer, leaves fluttering in rhythms that marked the false quiet breath. Skeptics call that poetry, and yet the enigma endures in a setup that looks engineered, where the Ataten dips over the fracture, where bronze tripods sit at distances that resolve standing waves, where the floor's slight slope invites condensate to collect away from the priestess. Scholars debate inscriptions that read like schedules, certain days, certain winds, while local shepherds recall crevices that hum just before weather turns. Others maintain the religious context-only frame narrows inquiry on purpose, protecting sanctity while blunting science. Archivists mutter about requests to test subchambers refused without comment. What remains is the way the site educates a voice. A Roman traveler noted a bronze grate that sang a bell before the ground shook, and a modern test found resonance near the human heartbeat. You begin soft, and the room rejects you. You find a pitch, and the stone replies. You breathe the mix, and time changes hands. If oracles were merely trance and theater, why the fault, the vault, and the consonant jars? If the sanctuary never interfaced with a system below, why do roots from Delphi drop into caves that answer drums? And if this was a protocol for controlled surface-subsurface contact, what was exchanged through that breath and echo? Who kept the ledger of permissions? And which doors under Parnassus still wait for the right word to unlock them? In a gorge, where fog clings low and hawks circle between cliffs, basalt portals rise from slopes like the black door frames of a buried city, lintels stacked with a cyclopean patience, and jambs worn smooth where nothing has rubbed for centuries. Beyond them, step galleries disappear into night, and further in, throats have been corked with plugs of fitted stone that show no tool a museum recognizes. The paradox stands silent in the cold air, gateways without traffic, engineering without declared purpose, doors that look designed to move but now sleep, as if the mountain built itself a set of eyelids and then forgot to blink. Some believe these are tombs writ large, necropolis theater fanned out along old tracks so the dead could command the view. Others claim they are watchposts and shrines, fort and altar hybridized by weather and legend. Fringe theorists propose storm doors to deeper habitations, sacrificial buffers that take the mountain's punch so the chambers below do not, with seismic latches that jam safely under certain frequencies and release only when the valley stops ringing. Local herders whisper that sometimes, after a long dry spell, the plugs warm before dawn and smell like rain from inside the hill. An old climber tells of a door that thudded once, deep and slow, the rock answering thunder no cloud had brought. Scholars remain divided. Archaeologists publish burial and end the paragraph. Engineers asked to test damping and are denied permits. And geophysicists sketch stress lines that run right under the portals as if invited. Historians dispute whether the step galleries suit procession or evacuation. Masons point to keystone pockets that look less pretty than practical, and to ash lenses near the thresholds that could be crushable fuses. Others argue that all this is romance in search of a marvel, that the plugs are collapsed vaults, and the lintels merely picturesque accidents of survival. Yet the geometry persists, door after door agreeing across valleys as though a template traveled on foot. Fringe researchers insist the plugged throats read like pressure valves, designed to crack on purpose at edges that direct failure away from the living rooms below. Skeptics counter that no such rooms have been proved. Still, shepherd maps show taboo strips where flocks are never penned. Strips that overlay old avalanche paths but also align with these gapped jaws. And elders say the safest rock under winter howl is always one bend past a basalt frame. Scholars debate mortar traces that seem to reseat a plug after a quake, and an unpublished notebook logs a post-shock clang from inside as though a latch resettled. Others maintain that structural testing is rightly banned, lest vibration damage heritage. Contractors grin and mutter that the mountain handles a hammer better than a hush. A seismologist set a sensor on a threshold and heard a stone heartbeat. And yet the enigma endures when a portal's jam hums under a small tap like a tuned box, when snow melts last around the frames, as if heat is guarded within, when ravens pick the same perches at dawn, as if waiting for breath. If these are only grand graves, why the shock-absorbing stone and keystones sized for behavior instead of beauty? If no deeper habitation waits, why the sacrificial buffers and latches implicit in the cut? And if the Caucasus keeps doors for weather and tremor, who learned to read the valley well enough to build them? Who walks below them when the ground is quiet? And what sequence of sound or storm would teach the mountain to open its eyes again? High tide sighs through stone throats, and, in the gray between bells, a librarian stoops beneath a bridge to lock a green door you'd swear belongs to the canal itself. Beyond it, Sotoportego vaults smell of vellum and salt. Parish crypts breathe, cool, and sealed basements keep a steady hush against the Adriatic's pulse. The paradox seeps in. Archives in a drowning city flourish below waterline. Brackish buffer zones protecting paper, hidden lifts that rise dry as lungs, waterproof stacks that age like wine. Some believe it's flood control dressed as prudence. Others argue it's a paper front for deeper repositories, knowledge nested under civic ledgers. Fringe researchers insist Venice learned to use salt as armor. Sump brine deterring rot, pressure doors muting tides, staircases sized for crates, not coffins. Scholars remain divided. Conservation rules curtail electronic scans. Contractors whisper about basements that don't plot. And custodians claim keys that fit no catalog. Still the questions linger. if preservation is the only motive, why the lift wells that descend past records into rock? If the shelves are innocent, who designed stack rooms like watertight holds? And when the librarian turns that bridgeside lock at dusk, what memory is being kept from the flood, from the city, and from us? In a chamber where stone sweats and light goes thin, a metal ring set flush in the rock turns without a scrape, and the air on your tongue changes as if a weather front arrived from nowhere. The seam around it is a hairline shine, tight as glass, the geometry reading like a pressure lock that forgot to fail. The paradox is tactile, corrosion-free fittings. In a cave that eats nails, airtight laps that seal like modern machining, a door that equalizes before it yields. Some suggest a medieval repair, monks with clever alloys patching old wounds. Others claim it's a surviving component from a far older system, kept alive by the chemistry of its metals. Fringe theorists propose non-ferrous laminates and lap joints built to drink pressure, not fight it. A maintenance hatch between regimes of air. Scholars still debate. Curators mark it out of context, store it off catalog, and decline hardness tests. Locals whisper it opens only when storms pass overhead. Yet the enigma endures. Who machined a hinge that never rusts here? What chamber needs a seal this exact, and when that ring turns and the room inhales, what pressure is asking to meet us? What world is trying to equalize, and what waits on the other side of silence? Under a white desert that never thaws, instruments catch the signature of a river that moves in blackout, subglacial channels running like ink through ice, waterfalls stepping between basins, pressurized lakes whispering to one another in a grammar of flow no sky has witnessed. The paradox carves its own bed, a hydrology alive without weather, tides under shelves that never see the moon, currents steering cargo in darkness. Some maintain it's melt plumbing only, Bossil friction heat and pressure doing ordinary work. Others argue the geometry looks purposeful. Channels that rise toward sills like ramps, confluences shaped like junctions. Fringe researchers insist these are liquid highways feeding sealed caverns, the polar underworld exchanging material by pulse and gradient. Scholars remain divided. Instrument windows are sparse, flight corridors trimmed or rerouted, data sets embargoed just as a plume appears. Pilots whisper about warm radar returns under cold routes. Yet the mystery doesn't recede. If this is mere drainage, why the timing that matches ocean tides? If pathways link basins, where are the harbors? Under the cap. And if rivers run black beneath the miles, who or what rides their pressure? Who keeps the gates at the sills? And where do these waters finally surface to breathe? A lake on Greenland's back turns to a whirl in seconds, glassy blue spinning, into a throat that sings as it swallows, and then the plain looks newly shaven, as if the sky itself fell into the ice. The moulin's rim steams in cold air, while a faint warmth rises from the hole, like a secret exhale. The paradox bites at the edges. Drainage in a desert of freeze, rivers under armor, and glacial tunnels that don't collapse when winter clamps down. Some believe these are simple sinks, hydrofracture and cryokarst venting seasonal melt. Others argue geothermal domes hold perennial caverns below the shield. So the water is a key, not an accident. Fringe researchers insist the shafts act like access sinks into deep, warm vaults, their timing tuned by pressure and tide. Scholars remain divided as remote sensors fail near vents. Cave dives are halted for safety, and radar passes go missing where the blue turns darkest. Yet the enigma endures. If these are only drains, why do some throats breathe heat in February? If entries open and shut with the sun, who or what uses that calendar? And if warm chambers wait beneath the shield, what machines, what archives, what long sleeping rooms are these wells still feeding? Clouds form beneath stalactites in Sonjuong as a river writes fog on stone, and a sunless jungle lifts a wet green roar toward dolines. Sky windows pouring daylight in shafts while wind carves corridors that boom like organ pipes at dusk. The paradox feels botanical. A rainforest under a ceiling, weather with walls, ecosystems thriving where light must fall through keyholes to live. Some suggest a freak collapse made a miracle. Karst did the work, and life merely arrived. Others claim the layout reads deliberate, a proof that megacaves can host stable ecologies if vents and domes are tuned. Fringe theorists propose subterranean convection cycles, breathable air drafted by thermal contrasts, soils built by drip chemistry, engineered or groomed long ago. Scholars still debate the limits as permits are capped, side passages left unmapped to preserve fauna, and rumors whisper of galleries that gust warm when the surface cools. And still the questions gather. If this forest is only happenstance, why do dolines fall where corridors direct wind like bellows? If the microclimate is a recipe, who learned to cook weather underground? And if biosphere scale habitability is real below ground, what cities could sleep inside jungles like this? What cultures would evolve without stars, and how would we ever hear them? Divers slide through a sapphire eye in Yucatan and drop into milk-blue halocline where fresh meets salt. Below, a river of dark sulfur snakes along the floor like smoke that forgot the sky, and stone portals lead to conduits of Sakaktun that wander under villages and fields with priestly calm. The paradox ripples, roads that drown, wells that connect towns more surely than any track above, offerings sitting in corners that feel like doorways rather than graves. Some believe cenotes were sacred mouths, nothing more than ritual and water. Others claim they were doorways into a continental cave web, used for pilgrimage, trade, and messages passed in torchlight. Fringe researchers insist density layers and stable thermoclines created dependable routes, with markers placed by hands that knew the map by breath. Scholars remain divided as closed caves follow finds, annex surveys publish thin, and locals whisper that certain passages take sound before they take a swimmer. Yet the riddle refuses to sink. If these are only holy pools, why do conduits align across leagues like arterial streets? If the web was navigated, who kept its laws? And if Xibalba still listens through its drowned roads, what stories are archived in that sulfur river? What answers sleep behind those blue eyes, and who is allowed to open them? A vertical slot in the jungle limestone swallows light like a blade sheathed in the earth, and the first ladder breathes a cold draught that smells faintly of oil, damp iron, and time. Down in the hush, smooth chambers catch the beam with mirror-flat planes. Orthogonal joints meet as if squared by machine, and geometric notches step the walls like shelves awaiting inventory. The paradox presses close. A cave that behaves like architecture, water-cut galleries, shaved, leveled, and true, floor plates graded as if for carts in a world of ropes. Some believe this is explorers' lore inflated by darkness. Others claim it's a cache room, polished for the storage of metallic plates, whispered about in campfire Spanish and Shuar stories. Fringe researchers insist the joinery reads deliberate, galleries leveled against flow, ledges sized repeatably. A system meant to house something that endures. Scholars remain divided. Expedition logs contradict. Sections go sealed for safety. Coordinates migrate between reports as if the cave edits itself. Still, the questions linger. If this is only myth, who dressed the rock like a vault? If plates never existed, why do the niches march in modules? And if record-keeping was designed for eternity, what language waits in that cold? What hand wrote it in metal? And who decided the library should forget us first? Lantern light brushes combed stone in long U, as if a giant rake passed over wet clay. Ribbing runs unbroken for meters. Pillar grids hold ceilings like a forest frozen mid-breath, and the waterline on the wall says a lake lived here, and then politely left without leaving a bucket of spoil behind. The paradox rings. Enormous man-made caverns with uniform tooling marks, yet no tool that fits. Negative architecture on an industrial scale, where the mountain has become the container, and the contents went missing. Some suggest storage pits, flood-resilient vaults to hold grain and tax. Others argue subterranean shipyards for a land without ships, rehearsal halls for buoyancy in a drowned age. Fringe theorists propose load transfer by ribs, acoustics tuned for orders, and staging floors for objects too politically inconvenient to document. Historians dispute dates. Engineers point to pillar placement that reads as calculation, and local records are neat where they should be messy. Scholars remain divided, while scan exemptions persist, and stratigraphy stays scant. And yet the mystery remains. If these were simple storehouses, where is the mountain that came out? If the marks are mere style, who trained a workforce to carve? Signatures without tools we can find. And if purpose hid itself on purpose, what moved through these vaults? What left only pattern behind? And what operation needed a cathedral with nothing inside? Across a hard horizon, a dotted scar of breathing holes taps the desert. Each shaft a cool eye peering into earth, and beneath them, Kanat tunnels slide downhill by faith in gravity. Their mother wells sunk deep into aquifer bone, while the air carries a slow sigh that smells of clay and night. The paradox is elegance in scarcity. Water that walks for kilometers underground without a pump. crops thriving on the whisper of a slope, cities drinking a river that never shows its face. Some believe the design is irrigation alone. Genius enough. Others maintain it doubles as blueprint for subterranean logistics, shaded transit, cold storage, courier lanes before roads. Fringe researchers insist thermal buffering and evaporative cooling made these lines into living infrastructure, kilometer-scale, low-energy arteries that could move perishables, messages, even people in summer's white heat. Scholars still debate deeper links. Old lines are mapped to the city edge. Then cartography goes coy, and modern roads tend to sit quietly above old runs. Officials claim there's nothing further. Surveyors whisper of branches that don't belong. Yet the enigma endures. If water was the only cargo, why are service shafts spaced like vents for breath as much as bucket? If the network knit towns, how far did the web truly reach? And if a civilization learned to live inside its rivers, what else flowed unseen? What treaties rode the cool? And who remembers the doors that open only to the slope? Pick marks glitter in lamplight, as if sweat were frozen into the stone, and a cool stream sings beneath Jerusalem like a secret vein, while footsteps echo along a tunnel that bends toward voices that carved from the other side. Behind walls, warrens, shaft yawns, and small dark feeders slip away where maps go mute. The paradox cuts deep. Was this only siege engineering, or a keyed gateway to sanctums never reopened? Some believe Hezekiah's work was pure survival, blind convergence, careful grade, water under lock and scripture. Others argue the geometry hides intent, concealed access nodes, cutbacks that serve more than buckets. Fringe researchers insist the system nests layers, defense, supply, and secrecy braided under bedrock. Scholars remain divided. Religious sensitivities stall archaeometry, surveys stop at shadows, and unmapped voids are marked later. Local guides whisper of drafts that smell older than the spring. And yet the enigma endures. If it was only plumbing, why the discreet side throats? If sanctuaries were sealed, who plotted the angles to find them again? And if the city learned to fight underground, what oaths keep the doors shut? What relics rest beyond the last turn? And what hymn does the stone still remember? A chalk corridor runs under Paris like a vein of pale night, and somewhere beneath, a sleeping street, a theater whispers to empty seats, as candles paint femurs honey gold. Beyond the ossuaries, quarry galleries step off into corridors that aren't on any tourist plan, past sealed doors marked only by old electricians' chalk. The paradox is civic and illicit at once, a grave solution that behaves like camouflage for operations that leave no obituary. Some suggest it's accidental, leftover stone made holy by necessity. Others claim clandestine annexes, repurposed pillars, mapped air drifts, and stole power from forgotten mains. Fringe theorists propose parallel functions, storage, rehearsals, routers for a city that learned to double itself. Scholars remain divided. No-go zones multiply. Confiscated surveys circulate as rumors, and quiet interdictions follow new arrows painted at night. Cataphiles whisper of rooms that hum though the bulb is cold. Still the questions linger. If this is only bone-keeping, why the tidy power taps? If the map stops here, who set the next markers? And if a second Paris breathes under the first, what is staged in those rooms? Who takes the audience seats at 2 in the morning? And what door down there opens only when the city sleeps? Frost beads on rebar at dawn in the Owl Mountains as rail spurs slide into mouths that end in perfect dark. The concrete is young, but the silence feels older. Galleries kink around blind stubs, cable beds wait like veins without blood, and side alcoves are fat with blast relief geometry. The paradox stands in the chill. Is Reese merely an abandoned factory, or an interface grafted onto something the builders found and did not name? Some claim wartime ambition ran out of men and minutes. Others argue TBM stubs and vibration isolation pads read like a retrofit around pre-existing voids. Fringe researchers insist the alignment's dogleg to avoid older chambers, the concrete wearing the mountain's past like a borrowed coat. Scholars remain divided. Records come in tatters, adits are sealed, and restricted nature reserve. Signs sprout where rumors thicken. Locals whisper of warm drafts in winter and a hum under snow. Yet the enigma persists. If nothing preceded it, why the careful decoupling? If an interface, to what core did they plan to dock? And if the tunnels were never finished, who still minds the locks? What system waits behind the plug walls, and whose timetable counts in that perpetual dark? A corridor in Burlington hums with stale, recycled breath. Fluorescent tubes buzzing above paint the color of old teeth. Switchboards blink like insomniac constellations. Reservoirs sleep behind blast doors, and a rail portal sits ajar to tracks that haven't tasted daylight in decades. The paradox is architectural. A city planned to live without clocks, built to wake only when the world went mute, yet maintained as if tomorrow might still require it. Some believe it's merely a Cold War relic, a museum of dread. Others argue it is a template. Redundant loops, pressure-zoned districts, self-contained utilities, showing how population-scale underlife could function now. Fringe researchers insist declassified maps reveal civic stacks. Kitchens over wards, wards over switch rooms over wells, all wrapped in eloped logic that never needs the sun. Scholars remain divided. Files arrive redacted. Tours end at resealed corridors, and technicians whisper about fans that test themselves at Euro 317 for no known schedule. And yet the puzzle refuses to sleep. If this was only contingency, why do certain loops remain warm? If the doors are dead, who audits the pressure? And if a clockless city still breathes beneath Corsham, who is meant to wake it? Who inherits its numbers, and who decides when down becomes home? Frescoes blink amber in firelight at Varzia, while galleries exhale mountain cold. You can taste tough dust on the tongue, where 600-plus rooms step from nave to cellar. Bell corridors carry whispers like wires, and irrigation stitches vineyards into cliffside balconies that should never grow grapes. The paradox cuts clear. Was this only a monastic refuge, or a node set into a longer chain, its escape tunnels more than flight, more like transit? Some suggest a sanctuary that scaled up under siege. Others claim wineries, water stairs, and smoke control read like a self-sufficient urban module designed for centuries, not seasons. Fringe theorists propose that collapses labeled natural mask, conduits that once dove deeper, bell tones as signals, soot baffles as codes, stairwells dovetailed to routes no traveler now can trace. Scholars remain divided. Structural probes halt at heritage lines. Deeper ducts go unprobed, and local herdsmen whisper of drafts that smell of wet ash after dry months. Still the questions spiral outward. If devotion alone drove the chisels, why the logistics of a city? If escape was the end, where do the tunnels truly end? And if Vartzia was a surface face for a buried network, what monastery wrote the schedule? What congregation traveled unseen, and what bells ring now where no hand pulls a rope? Night rain runs through Lalibela's trenches like ink through ruled stone, and never floods. Rock-hewn churches rise below ground, their roofs level with the earth. Culverts vanish under thresholds, and subcrypts sip the cool as if the hill were a lung. The paradox gleams under lanterns, pilgrim works that behave like drains of light and water. A ritual map engineered to move storms, heat, and breath with monastic calm. Some believe the design is pure devotion, sculpted into basalt. Others maintain the trench networks, capillary cooling, and hidden stair vents speak a second language, hydraulic spiritual systems that route more than worship. Fringe researchers insist each processional path rides a gradient. Choir pits sit at the confluence of runoff, chanting clocks the airflow like bellows for a people who understood depth living. Scholars remain divided. Religious protections keep basements unscanned, and masonry that sounds hollow is declared sacred silence. And yet the enigma persists in the rain's obedience. If prayer alone explained the plan, who tuned the trenches to the cloud? If the subcrypts are only shrines, why the chilled air on drought days? And if ritual and engineering fused here for deep habitation, what doors are these churches covering? What water are they teaching? And what city below is being kept in practice by every storm above? A trickle becomes a silver blade at Petra, pressed into sandstone by human hands, until the torrent is taught to vanish into a chiseled seam. Covered channels whisper beneath rose-red steps. Cistern ladders drop into cool lungs. Pressure jars squat by sluices that blink awake at rain. The paradox glints in drought. A caravan oasis that behaves like a thinking engine. Gradient control coaxing head. Sediment traps pre-decanting clarity. Cliff face intakes sipping storms before they strike. Some believe it's elegant plumbing for travelers. Others argue the layout reads as a hydraulic processor for a larger network, routing surplus toward unseen receivers. Fringe researchers insist pressure rhythms here speak downstream, valves time to echo beyond the canyon. Scholars remain divided. Tourist routes, skirt rumored lower galleries, guides change subjects near grated stairs. Yet the enigma endures. If water served only cups, why the logic of buffers and pulses? If the brain was local, where did its thoughts, its flows, finally go? And if the Nabateans mastered planet-class water below ground, what region did this system steady? What city drank in secret after Petra slept? And who still listens to these channels when the desert goes silent? Air burns the throat at Movile. Blind crustaceans ripple through amber haze, and droplets beat on limestone like sweat from a buried lung, while bacterial veils quilt the water in living cream. The paradox breathes without sunlight, a chemosynthetic biosphere humming in sealed darkness, sulfur springs, feeding microbial engines that mint oxygen, and food with no leaf, no sky. Some suggest it is an accidental isolation, a geological fluke bottled for eons. Others claim the stability looks curated, a testbed for closed-loop living, where gas stratification and drip chemistry are tuned like instruments. Fringe researchers insist the metabolism stack, chemolithotrophy to grazer to predator, resembles a designed life support cascade. Scholars still debate. Access is sterilized, boundaries tightened, data releases curated to the gram, and locals whisper that a ESO second chamber smells different. And yet, the riddle keeps breathing. If this is mere luck, who arranged resilience across millennia? If it is a model, what habitat was it modeling for? And if sun-independent life thrives here, what depth settlements could borrow its script? What failures would it forgive? And what exactly is being protected from contamination? The cave or the future? A rope drops into breathing black at Krubera and keeps dropping. Water hammers somewhere beyond the beam. Sumps swallow syllables, and cold drafts move like thoughts from rooms the map has not earned. The paradox is a vertical horizon, the deepest cave that feels less like an end than a stairwell. 2 kilometers of abyssal architecture with air pockets that arrive where logic says stone. Some maintain it is merely a champion depth, nothing more. Others claim phreatic zones, and barometric winds hint at stacked tiers, an unmapped level architecture shedding pressure like a lung. Fringe theorists propose hypogene development has hollowed corridors upward as well as down, linkable by timing, not trail. Scholars remain divided. Political borders complicate routes. Conflict shutters entrances. Returns come incomplete. Kever's whisper of drafts that switch direction with storm fronts. No surface barometer predicted. Still the questions lean over the pit. If this is a limit, why does the airflow argue otherwise? If tiers do repeat, what vertical city could nest in those pockets? And if the mountain is latticed deeper than our rope, who chose the order of rooms? Who keeps the water in time? And where de-survey tape flutters in a breathless draft, as Chevy turns back on itself like a thinking serpent, scalloped walls glistening, while footsteps count the looped gradient, and the ceiling lowers just where the pulse begins to race. Ahead, a decision room narrows into a choke of stone, where CO2 hangs like an unseen gatekeeper, and the only way forward is the way the body chooses. The paradox is psychological. Vast karst should feel chaotic, yet the system behaves as if it were pacing a mind, testing attention, controlling breath, rewarding patience with air, and punishing haste with sour gas. Some believe it's nothing but hydrology carving whimsy. Others argue the switchbacks, sinks, and choice points amount to designed pathways, guidance architecture written in limestone. Fringe researchers insist unshared sonar at flooded leads hints at intentional spirals mapping stress into compliance. Scholars remain divided. Expeditions stall at sumps. Logs are redacted. Locals whisper that the cave remembers footsteps. Still the questions crowd the constriction. If this maze is natural, why does it cue our physiology so precisely? If it trains behavior, to what end? And when the line dips into black water and the tape flutters again, who laid out the lesson? Who set the test? And who waits beyond the last room? Heat shimmers in a low wind, and the floor falls away into dragon's breath. A vaulted cavern, opening onto warm, living water that runs beyond the lamp's reach, until the ripples carry darkness back to your ankles like a quiet tide. The paradox rolls on the surface, an underground sea with no visible shorelines, waves that travel without weather, a lake that breathes as if a coastline were hiding under stone. Some suggest a karst reservoir, a fortunate pocket of the aquifer scaled to astonish. Others claim the vault's span and thermal stratification look like a harbor for hidden migration, blue water logistics beneath a desert map. Fringe theorists propose echo navigation here, isles of sound that steer craft by return time, not sight. Scholars remain divided. Dive limits end where sonar trails go unpublished, and safety keeps the northern chambers silent. And yet the water keeps signaling. If this is only storage, why the steady thermal lanes? If it is a port, what vessels time their crossings to the cave's breath? And if an invisible shore waits beyond the beam, who tied the knots in the dark? Who pilots by echo alone? And where does this sea pour itself when the stone sleeps? Columns march away into manufactured night beneath Istanbul, each reflection in the basilica cistern, offering a false road, while drops ring from vaulted brick onto water that moves so slowly it seems to think before turning a corner. Medusa stares sidewise from a plinth as if guarding a path the tour doesn't take. The paradox gleams between arches, storage that reads like transit, flow balancers that could just as easily be traffic regulators, sediment bays doubling as quiet bays, a reservoir stitched to sub-Byzantine corridors that map like streets. Some believe it is only water work, a masterclass in keeping a capital quenched. Others claim concealed movement lives in the gratings and maintenance-only passages, a second city pacing under the first. Fringe researchers insist pressure. Regulation was tuned to timetable pulses, sluice by sluice, allowing foot and cargo to pass unseen. Scholars still debate. Gratings stay locked. Surveys vanish into municipal drawers, and guides change topic where the air drifts cold. Still the questions ripple under the lanterns. If this is merely a cistern, why the roots that refuse to be? Still, if a network hides here, where does its timetable end? And if a city once traveled beneath its own streets, who rang the signal? Who holds the keys now? And what lies one doorway past the water's edge? Steam feathers through a sapphire throat, where black basalt ribs hold a ceiling of lit milk, and each footfall snaps a sugar-thin glaze that refreezes before the echo returns. Skylights glow amber with geothermal breath, while rime flowers bloom beside warm stone like winter and forge, arguing in the same lung. The paradox bites through the cold. Under glaciers that should crush and freeze, subglacial lava tubes persist, ventilated by chimneys and ringed with glassy ice, habitable pockets in a place that shouldn't host a pulse. Some believe these are tourist wonders, fleeting sculptures of heat and weather. Others argue they are ready-made thermal habitats, rock-ice insulation baking a steady room from the planet's own fire. Fringe theorists propose ash layer filters and meltwater sumps act as natural scrubbers, hinting at closed-loop life support beneath worlds of snow. Scholars remain divided. Seasonal closures and hazard tags end spurs just where the warmth gathers, and instruments fail near vents that roar like hidden furnaces. And yet the mystery remains. If these are accidents, why the repeatable comfort zones? If they are prototypes, who taught ice to keep a hearth? And if the vaults are doors, what communities could thrive inside them? How deep do their chimneys descend? And who decides which throats are mapped and which are left to steam in silence? A candle scuffs soot on rock as a body slides sideways into a passage. Purpose thin, shoulders scraping, knees pushing, breath counted between stone and darkness. The tunnel kinks into a schlupf squeeze, then opens just large enough to turn. A head, not a life, and the air moves as if spoken messages had learned to travel without a mouth. The paradox is scale. A medieval network too small to live in, yet too deliberate to dismiss, with no hearth, no room, only corridors, built for something other than shelter. Some suggest hiding holes, penitential crawls, or treasure blinds. Others claim voice ports and choke points reveal a signaling lattice, pressure draft messaging for neighbors below. Fringe researchers insist the drafts can be tuned, that hums carry through stone while armies and taxes pass overhead. Historians dispute function, and scholars remain divided. Sites are fenced as folklore, catalogued locally, never surveyed, as a continent-wide system. Some whisper they align with older voids. Others maintain coincidence. Still the questions linger. If not habitation, then what urgency cut miles of human-sized pipes? If a code once moved here, who taught air to bear it? And if these are conduits, where is the receiver? Who listened in the dark? And what message was worth crawling the earth to speak? Calcite candles drip in slow applause, while jaguar vessels blink from niches like watchmen, and a throne of stalactites gleams with mineral tears as if the cave itself had accepted an oath. The door behind is not stone, but promise, sealed by ritual, lights lowered, until the air thickens to honey and thyme. The paradox sits on the floor, a working cave stilled mid-breath, offerings arranged as if in use yesterday, airflow arrested so flames bow and die, water table managed like a sleeping heart. Some believe this was sacred storage, a ritual freeze to honor and preserve. Others argue it was the formal closure of a portal, procedures to retire access to a deeper network without breaking it. Fringe theorists propose the vessels mark pressure points, that sealing baffles and plug stones tuned humidity and sound, turning passage into archive and alarm. Scholars still debate. Excavation windows are rationed, annexes remain unentered, and guides repeat the script while skipping the drafts that move against the map. Yet the enigma endures. If this was only ceremony, why engineer the airflow to stop? If a door was closed, what hall lies beyond the throne? And if the cave remembers oaths, who swore the last one, who keeps it now, and what wakes when the 1,000 eyes are left alone with the dark? A wedge of twilight clings to tufa as a trapezoidal corridor drinks your voice and drags it forward, each footstep tugged by a breeze that shouldn't know your name. Torches smolder sideways, and the stone itself seems to count the seconds between breaths. The paradox hums in the geometry, a mythic passage that behaves like an instrument, sightlines throttled, corners biased, wind guided, as if speech were the payload. Some suggest the galleries are no more than Roman military works, theatrically repurposed. Others claim the angles and taper form an aerophone, a tuned throat for trance and command. Fringe researchers insist light gate timing and echo bias hide a communications link to rooms below. The oracle, a protocol rather than a person. Scholars remain divided, and antiquity-only labels freeze acoustic tests at the entrance. And yet, the mystery remains. Who shaped a hallway to magnetize sound? Who set wind to carry orders? And who waited in the hidden chambers when the cadence matched the code? If the vault still responds, what word wakes it? What chorus opens it? And what voice answers back from the deeper dark? Desert sun bleaches the ridge. Then a stair plunges through sulfur ghostlight into turquoise steam. Breath fogs at the threshold, while the water holds the warmth of a human palm, a subterranean sea whose ceiling beads like a mirror of sweat. The paradox ripples across the stone. Under arid sky, a lake keeps body temperature and balance, ventilating itself like a lung with no winter. Some believe it's a fortunate bath grotto, a fault-fed curiosity. Others maintain the mineral buffer and constant climate are signatures of staging, a way station on a buried route threaded by vapor vents. Fringe theorists propose dye tracing would reveal feeders that never see daylight, but permissions stall. Safety shutters neighboring mouths just when the drafts align. Historians dispute intent, scholars remain divided, and instruments come home empty after brief failures in the mist. Still the questions linger. If comfort is accidental, why does the lake hold a home's degree? If wayfinding is the point, where do the warm veins travel next? And if the grotto is a door with its own weather, who taught the air to open it? Who swims beyond the blue, and who locks the stair behind? Night lays velvet on a limestone hill until windows burn from stone like embers. Streets are carved as channels of shadow. Roofs tilt rain into mouths that drink, and stairways fold back into the cliff as if the town were exhaled from inside the rock. The paradox is domestic, poverty in the history books, but systems in the walls, cistern lacework, grain vaults, hypogea, an under-urbanism tuned to seasons rather than money. Some believe the Sassi are relics of hardship preserved by stubbornness. Others suggest they model continuity. Thermal mass living, pitched roofs as cistern inlets, warren streets that share shade and sound. Fringe researchers insist sub-basements and linked caves sketch a scalable pattern for life beneath a city's skin, a manual hiding in plain sight. Scholars still debate scope. Heritage lenses halt deeper scans where the oldest veins branch, and yet the mystery remains. If this is only memory, why does the fabric behave like a plan? If the plan scales, who else learned to nest families in stone and water? And if the lower levels continue, what neighborhoods lie unwritten? What markets breathe underfoot? And what lights never open to the sky? Sea spray powders, chalk faces, while gulls pinwheel over a door that is sky until a hinge swings and the horizon becomes a hallway. Air tastes of salt and oil, and wind climbs shafts that were designed to breathe with the tide. The paradox is maritime. Tunnels for war and rescue threaded through cliff galleries that feel older than sirens. Lift shafts like forgotten lighthouses turned inside. Some claim these are purely modern shelters, Dover-Calais, nerves, hardened by blitz and fog. Others argue the galleries reawakened older maritime corridors, cliff venting and corrosion control tuned to routes that predate semaphore. Fringe theorists propose unlit spurs angled towards submarine chalk caverns, tide gate locks hiding longer crossings. Scholars remain divided. Maps are patchwork, spur lights stay dead, and maintenance signs read like erasures. Yet the enigma endures. If only wartime, why the corridors to nowhere? If older paths were reopened, who taught the cliffs to keep their bearing? And if a door can become sky when the wind turns, where does the horizon truly begin? What ships pass under the streets, and who closes the tide behind them? Across continents, chambers hum at private notes while water logic ticks in cisterns. Pressure doors breathe, and thermal hubs keep a steadiness that feels familiar in foreign stone. Diagrams from cultures that never met rhyme in gradients, angles, and rhythms like a language without a script. The paradox gathers in the pattern. Resonance rooms in Malta and Cumae, hydraulic brains at Petra, pressure locks in nameless rock, codes recurring where timelines should not. Some believe it's convergent utility, the planet teaching the same tricks to different hands. Others claim interoperable standards, frequencies, stacked habitats, closed-loop life, a shared design grammar beneath the flags. Fringe researchers insist that heritage, safety, and security fences ring bits of a single map, never the whole. Scholars remain divided. Field notes vanish into archives, test permissions expire, and cross-comparisons stall at the border of their labels, and still the questions breathe. If the patterns are standards, who drafted them and who maintains them? If standards require oversight, where is the council and where are its tools? And if tools require a signal, what tone would wake the network? What reply would arrive? And what threshold would decide whether we are admitted or turned away? Night settles on the surface while, far below, notes resonate. Water meters its patience and pressure doors count like sentries. The same solutions blink across eras and climates, as if the earth were a single machine, serviced by hands that prefer shadow to sunrise. Scholars still debate coincidence, and historians dispute contact, but the breath between sites feels measured, the rhythms repeating where they should only echo. Some whisper we're mapping ruins. Others suggest we are reading maintenance logs, inheriting procedures rather than poems. Fringe theorists propose a civilization that chose the dark by design, trading sky for stability, spectacle for continuity. And yet the question will not lie down. If resonance, water logic, thermal refuge, and sealed transit recur like a grammar, are we only late to the alphabet? If someone is still listening, what signal proves we are ready to answer? And if readiness is not about volume, but wisdom, what must change here on the surface? Who must we become? And when the ground itself inhales, will it breathe us in or close the door?